If you're like me, then you're kind of sort of addicted to Helldivers 2. Some people love it for the democracy, some people love it for the cool weapons, and others just love hanging out with their friends. But the one thing we all have in common is that we love the stratagems. But not all the stratagems are built equally. So today, I thought it'd be a really fun idea to put all of the Helldivers 2 stratagems in a tier list, from F tier to S tier. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a professional Helldivers 2 player. While I love spreading democracy, I'm also terrified of level 7, 8, and 9 missions. But I'm no longer a noob. So this tier list is here to help all the noobs out there figure out which stratagems are worth buying and which ones are kind of worth ignoring for a bit. Per usual, this is just my opinion, so if you disagree, feel free to leave a comment, but please, just keep it polite. You guys have to really stop talking about how stupid my mustache looks, okay? That's just like not fair. So, without further ado, let's start this tier list, shall we? Starting with F tier is reserved for the stratagems that are completely useless. Thankfully, there's only one stratagem that I personally find to fit in this category, and that stratagem is the ballistic shield backpack. What can I say about this? It's not good versus bugs. In fact, it completely doesn't work versus bugs. It's okay, I guess, versus the automatons. But seeing as it takes away your backpack slot, can only be used with a secondary or a one-handed weapon, which means you can't use some of the better weapons in this game, and it's a glitchy mess. Anytime you stim or pick up anything or just do anything, you're just stuck T-posing. It's so stupid. But in spite of these glitches, I just don't see why you would run the ballistic shield backpack. There are better shields and better backpacks. These stratagems are all kind of bad or are just completely outclassed, and you'll either want to avoid them, or if they're early stratagems, use them until you don't have to anymore. And at the bottom of D tier, we have, unfortunately, the machine gun. It's your first weapon stratagem you ever get, and while it's not completely useless, it's just not worth a stratagem spot over so many other great weapons at your disposal, especially once you try the higher difficulties, where this will feel like a pea shooter. Also, its reload time is abysmal. Its damage does not justify having to stand still to reload. I know that for everybody, this is their first gun, but let's be honest, you haven't used it since you started. Next up in D tier, we have the Tesla Tower. In theory, this is one of the most broken defensive stratagems, but in reality, it kills your teammates more than it kills the enemies. And it's not even consistently good at killing enemies. If it works correctly, it's busted. But in practice, you'll kill your teammates and yourself 90% of the time. Next up, we have two stratagems that I'm putting in the same category, which is Eagle Smokes and the Orbital Smokes. While the smokes, in theory, are great for blitz modes and just speedrunning missions, most of the time, you would rather have a stratagem that kills the enemies and destroys things. While yes, the smokes can disorient the enemies, it's not that good at doing that. I think if you're going for a stealth strategy, these can work, but objectively, it's just not worth it over so many better orbital and eagle stratagems. Next, we have the anti-personnel minefield. If you put this in the right spot, you'll get tons of kills, but a lot of the time, the enemies won't even trigger them or even die, and sometimes they just won't even cross the mine's path. Then your team is stuck with these mines blocking pathways and potentially putting them in danger. It's just not worth it. Next is orbital gas. Orbital gas will cover the area in this caustic type of gas that is pretty decent against most enemy types, but to be completely honest, it really doesn't do enough damage to be worth using in your orbital slot. On the bright side, it does have a short cooldown, so that does make it a little bit more desirable, but yeah, there are better orbital strikes, trust me. Then we have the HMG emplacement. It's a great turret, but you're forced to be inside of it, which limits your firepower. In this game, there are so many great turrets that don't require you to be inside of them. So why would you choose this turret over them? I think it's pretty obvious why this is in D tier. Then we have the laser cannon. This weapon, it's bait. Don't buy it. It may look powerful, and theoretically, it can have unlimited ammo, but it's just so weak compared to other weapons. And I know it got a buff, but even with the buff, it doesn't really feel like it does much more. So while it looks cool as hell, you'll look like a dork trying to use it to kill chargers. I just don't see why you would use it over much better weapons in this game. Then we have the machine gun sentry. It's a little turret. Look at it go. This turret isn't even that bad. It's just completely outclassed by another much better turret. And it has like no ammo. It comes in, kills 3 things, and leaves. It's really not worth it. But if it's all you can afford, don't buy it. Save up for the Gatling turret. It's not even that much more expensive. Then we have another machine gun, and it's the Stalwart. While it's not as strong as the machine gun, it's honestly better than it since you can move while reloading. And that's a big deal because if you have to stand still, you'll die. However, I don't really think you will want your weapon stratagem spot to go to a glorified primary weapon. That is honestly worse than some of the primary weapons you get without using a stratagem. In the early difficulties, it's awesome. But once you grow up, you'll grow out of it fast. You'll be like Andy not wanting to play with Woody anymore. And at the top of D tier, we have the Orbital EMS. I think the Orbital EMS is a bit underrated by a lot of people. I think most people are just using it incorrectly. The ability to slow down enemies, especially automatons, it does what the smokescreen wants to do, but better, because it will actually help you escape. However, just like smokes, you would much rather have a strike that will actually clear the enemies over stunning them. And if you want EMS effects, there's a better version of that in the sentries, which we'll talk about later. C tier are all stratagems that are okay. They can be good in very specific niches, or they're just slightly outclassed by better stratagems. At the bottom of C tier, we have the Eagle Strafing Run. Early game, this will feel like a beast of a stratagem, but it's really outclassed very quickly by much more useful and better strikes. Plus, it really doesn't do much versus heavy armored enemies, which is what you want the strikes to do. So if you want to play in the big leagues, drop this for some of the better boys in the higher tiers. Then we have the Eagle 110mm rocket pods. One of the cool things about this is that it does lock onto the biggest enemy, but I just don't think it does enough. It either doesn't have a big enough radius or it just completely misses a lot of the time. It's really not worth it, as other strikes will deal with the biggest threat or more enemies better than this one ever could. Then we have the Orbital 120 and 380. I put them together because I feel like they do similar things, just one is a little bit bigger than the other. They are great for just creating tons of sporadic and random damage, but that's just its main issue. It's inconsistent and can straight up miss the target you were going for in the first place, which honestly makes it not worth it immediately. Not to mention, it's very easy to kill you because it's so random. Maybe I'm just using them wrong, but I don't know why anyone would use these over much better orbitals and eagle strikes. I could also just be stupid. That is never out of the question. Up next is the anti-material rifle. While sniping is fun, and this does have a semi-armor piercing effect, I do think there are better weapons that do more with less. However, against automatons, this is kind of a beast. If you can land headshots, you're going to be able to put in some work. So in the medium and even the challenging difficulties, it's not bad, but you have way better toys to play with in the higher tiers. Next up, we have the Orbital Gatling Strike. The Orbital Gatling Strike targets one area and only that area over and over and over again. It's not explosive, so you're not going to blow up buildings, but any enemies in there will most likely die. But it won't really do that much against heavily armored enemies, so it really begs the question as to why you would use such a narrowly focused weapon when you could use something that's probably a little bit more accurate and a lot stronger. And next we have the Orbital Airburst. I feel like the Orbital Airburst does what the Orbital Gatling wants to do, but like better. But even saying that, it's just not that good of an orbital either. Trust me, this isn't me just hating on orbitals. As we get later into the list, the orbitals become insane. You don't want to have to use these orbitals that can completely miss or whiff or do nothing. You want orbitals that are going to guarantee a hit on some of the strongest enemies in this game. Next, we have the Guard Dog. Not to be mistaken with the Guard Dog Rover, that one's a good boy. This Guard Dog technically does a little bit more damage with a huge trade-off of having to reload all the time. Seriously, it gets like 3 kills and then goes back in your back. It's just not as efficient as its better older brother. And you unlock both of the guard dogs at around the same time, so there's clearly one that is objectively better, which we'll talk about later. Next is the Jump Pack. The Jump Pack is so good in one specific niche, and that is in missions where you need to get in and get out real quick, like the Blitz missions. Otherwise, the Jump Pack is more or less used the same way you would use any other shield, as a tool to survive. However, I don't think it's as good mid-fight, and it's just better to run away. I get it. We've all been there. We all want to look like Boba Fett. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not your dad. Next is Incendiary Mines. These are just better versions of the regular mines, as they leave a trail of fire that have the potential to kill enemies, even after they explode, which is great. But just like the other mines, it has the same issues. Even in early levels, the stratagem feels kind of worse than other defensive stratagems, so it's really not worth it. Hopefully in the future they buff both of the mines by maybe increasing the amount of mines or making the cooldown shorter, because otherwise you're going to want to use a turret. Next is the shield generator relay. While this shield protects your team, it just doesn't feel like it does enough. I think it loses its health a bit too quickly, which will definitely make it feel a bit underwhelming. In some situations, it can be a lifesaver, but if you just want a shield, there is a better option. It's a little more selfish, but it's more consistent than this. Then we have the expendable anti-tank. This stratagem is one of the best early game answers to big bosses, tanks, chargers, whatever you need to kill, you can do it. However, you only have one shot, and then you just discard it. The cooldown for the stratagem is rather quick, so you kind of end up with the rocket launcher on command. If you play it right, it can be very good, even in the higher levels. But honestly, there are better rocket launchers. Just don't discount it. Next is the orbital walking barrage. This might be the most slept on orbital. I can see it becoming more and more relevant in the meta, because it is the most unique in that it attacks in a linear fashion. But besides that, I just don't feel like it does enough. You'll get your kills here and there, but it's so specific and situational, I can't justify running it over other much better orbitals. And at the top of seats here, we have the Eagle Napalm Strike. Bugs hate fire. This creates a lot of fire. So against a big wave of bugs, the Napalm Strike is great for crowd control. And it can also get rid of bug nests. But I think what holds it back from being a little bit higher tier is how the Napalm doesn't really do enough fire damage to a lot of the heavier enemies. If they buffed it to make its initial impact a little bit stronger, I actually think this could be a high tier Eagle Strike. B tier are good stratagems. In the right circumstances, these stratagems are high tier, but they're held back by some key weaknesses that don't make them as strong as other higher tier stratagems. First up is the Eagle Cluster Strike. The Eagle Cluster Strike is crowd control. It has an extremely wide radius, kills almost everything in sight, does decent damage on even the heavier targets, and if you max upgrade your Eagle Strikes, you get 5 of them, which is a lot. Sure, you noobs are probably going to kill your friends more than you kill enemies with them, but if you know its trajectory, you can definitely secure tons and tons of kills with this Cluster Strike. Then we have the Flamethrower. After its buff, this weapon can kill chargers a lot easier, and it's all around insanely good versus bugs. It's basically an S tier weapon against bugs, but it's very bad versus automatons. And one of the biggest issues that I have with it is that you'll definitely set yourself on fire. In my opinion, it's really not worth the hassle, but yes, it is fun, and in the right hands, it can be a beast. So I can't stop you from burning yourself alive, but don't say I didn't warn you. Then we have the Rocket Sentry. This turret has the potential to be insanely good, but you need upgrades for it to see its maximum power. It's a bit too slow and also fires too slow, but its damage output is great and can be exactly what you need to secure democracy. But I do think if you want an explosive sentry, there's a better choice later in the list. Then we have the EMS mortar turret. One of the biggest issues I have with the other turrets is how short they last, or how inaccurate they feel, not the mortars. They shoot enemies by shooting into the air, and then it comes back, and then boom. They also seem to last forever. It feels like they never run out of ammo. And this one has the EMS effect, which is actually great to pair with other stratagems. It's also great on defensive missions. I just love that you can place it safely away from the main fight and get a ton of value, especially on robot missions. It is just completely outclassed by the other better version of itself, the other mortar, but still, it's a solid pick, especially when combined with other turrets. Just watch out, don't get too close to the enemies whenever any mortar is out. It's dangerous, so play at a little bit of a distance. Then we have the Orbital Precision Strike. This is one of the original stratagems that you get, and honestly, in the right hands, it's amazing. Sure, its radius is not that big, but if you can land it, it will kill everything. And I mean everything. So that's really its only downside. You have to be a little bit more accurate, which is honestly pretty hard to do against faster moving targets like the charger. But considering that its cooldown isn't too crazy, it's honestly not a bad choice. Then we have the Gatling Sentry. The Gatling Sentry is really good in the early game, but it becomes increasingly worse as the difficulty spikes, as it really doesn't do much versus stronger, heavily armored enemies. That being said, on defense missions, it still goes ham and is definitely great when paired with other turrets. So while I do think it's just outclassed, there's some missions where I don't mind it. And it's also definitely just an upgrade to the machine gun turret. Don't use that, please. This is the one. You should use this one. It's all around better. Then we have the Arc Thrower. I might be overrating this weapon a bit, forgive me, but my god, it feels so good to play with. Unlimited ammo in a game where ammo can at times be scarce is a huge deal. But also, the fact that this weapon does very good damage to multiple enemies at a time is huge. Pair this with some solid orbitals and Eagle Strike, airstrikes, and you could seriously wipe out hundreds of enemies easily and not waste any ammo. It also can kill teammates rather easily, which is, kind of a problem, but I think good players can learn its radius and sweet spot and get a ton of value with it. It's not the best versus big bosses though. But if your team can compensate for that, you can be the cleaner of the group for sure. And at the top of B tier, we have the recoilless rifle. This weapon is a great answer to the bosses and big threats. While you do need a backpack to reload it, it's worth it for the damage you will put out. And also, you do have the ability to reload it for your teammates, which can give it a higher rate of fire and make it even more deadly. I think it's an all-around solid option for most players trying to climb to the higher levels and defeat stronger foes. But I do find its extremely slow reload time to be a bit of a reason why it can't be an A tier. These are great stratagems. The only reason these stratagems aren't an S tier is because they're not outright broken. They have flaws, but in the right hands, they are all you need to survive. First up is the spear. It's the best weapon to call down to kill a tank, period. And that's really enough reason for it to be an A tier. However, the fact that it has to lock on is a bit annoying, and it does make it very niche as you can't use it on smaller enemy clusters, which does hamper its versatility. But come on, if the only thing you gotta worry about is little dudes, you're fine. Then we have the autocannon sentry. If you place this right, it will shred through most enemies, including the chargers and big robots. But the issue is that it gets trampled and destroyed by enemies a little too easily. You have to place it high and far, so it has time to kill the big baddies. It also feels like the turret that kills me the most, but the high risk is worth the high reward of this turret. It's a turret that requires a bit more finesse and skill. If used correctly, it's great. Then we have the supply pack. The supply pack is so good. In the higher difficulties, you run out of ammo, you run out of stims, you run out of grenades, you run out of everything really fast. Having one friend be that support guy can be the difference in whether or not your team succeeds. Yes, I know you can call resupplies, but sometimes you don't have time for that, and sometimes you just need the ammo now. Hot take, I think every team should have at least one supply pack guy. Okay? That's my hot take. Next up is the grenade launcher. The grenade launcher is one of the best early game weapons, and it honestly stays good even in the higher levels. It destroys bugs nests easily. It bullies robots and medium-sized enemies. It plows through swarms like nothing. I love it. The only downside it has is that it's not the greatest versus heavy enemies. But against everything else, it's very good. Do not pass up on the grenade launcher, especially if you're new. Then we have the autocannon. This is an all-around great weapon. While it does also require a backpack to reload, it has tons of ammo, a great fire rate, solid damage, and it's not even that hard to use and land shots. It's a little bit forgiving, honestly, especially when your friend is reloading for you. You can even kill bigger enemies with it if aimed correctly, so really practice it. I personally love this weapon, and I think most people will too. Give it a try if you haven't already. Then at the top of A tier, we have the Eagle Airstrike. It may seem crazy, but this simple Eagle Airstrike is good against bugs, it's good against tanks, it's good against buildings, it's good against bug nests, it's good against everything. It also doesn't have that long of a cooldown, which means that you're gonna have it more often. This, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated airstrikes. You don't really need anything fancy when you have something this consistent. Consistency is key in this game. S tier belong to the stratagems that do something that no other stratagem can do. They are the best versions of every single type of thing out there. And at the bottom of S tier, we have the railgun. The railgun is the best stratagem weapon in the game. Yes, even after the nerf. It's strong enough to deal with chargers and bigger robots while also having the versatility of not needing a backpack to reload. It's just too good. But thankfully, it's not a requirement anymore, as the nerf really did hurt it, and now it takes a bit longer to kill stronger enemies. But let's be honest, nothing else in this game really consistently kills enemies anyway. So what other stratagem weapon were you gonna use? I think good players will still find that even after its nerf, it's still great. It will just require a bit more patience and precision. In the right hands, if you charge it long enough, it can and will kill anything. It's just not a free kill like it used to be. Now it's more like a skill kill. By the way, all the noobs out there, make sure you put it on unsafe mode. I know you can kill yourself, but it's worth it to get that damage and destroy charger legs and destroy armored enemies. Does that make sense? Next is the 500 kilogram bomb. It's a nuke. Simple as that. Up next in S tier, we have the orbital laser. Okay, so while the 500 kilogram bomb are great for just clearing out an area, I feel like what the laser does is more generally useful. The fact that it tracks the enemy is great. It leaves a trail of fire. Even after it's done killing the bigger enemy, it will go for other enemies. I think that's what makes it really versatile versus the 500 kilogram bomb. The laser can kill an entire swarm if you let it. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I love the laser. Then we have the energy shield backpack. This also received a nerf pretty recently, where its cooldown is a little bit longer. In spite of that, it's still the best shield in the game. You can tank hits from everything. And in the higher difficulties, it's like a second life. There's a reason that they nerfed it, and trust me, there's a reason why everyone's still using it. Up next is the Guard Dog Rover. Because the Energy Shield backpack got nerfed, people are realizing the power of the Guard Dog Rover. It technically has to cool down whenever it overheats, but it never really overheats, like ever, which is insane. So it can get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 kills. And then it's like, oh, I need to cool down. So much better than the regular Guard Dog. You pair the Guard Dog with any good weapon, and you can kill almost anything. Maybe not like Bile Titans and tanks, but everything else, the Guard Dog can deal with it. Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Then we have the Mortar Sentry. This is the most useful sentry of them all, especially in the missions where you need to kill a bunch of enemies. Yes, I know it kills civilians and yourself, but if you place it right and you place it early, automatons and bugs will never even get close to the civilians. Its ability to shoot enemies without even being in line of sight is huge, as it allows for more tactical placement and its damage is insanely high, with solid splash damage, so it kills even little things really easily. It also just feels like it never runs out of ammo. It just stays there menacingly, killing everything. Yeah, obviously in more offensive missions, it's not the best, but even then, it's still pretty useful. It's just the best sentry as it crushes all of the defensive missions with ease. It's a must pick in those defensive missions. And it's not even that expensive, so if you're still new, pick it up. Then we got our newest stratagem, the Patriot Exosuit. I would describe this as a get out of jail free card. You can have 3 main stratagems that will keep you alive, and then your 4th stratagem is this Patriot Exosuit just ready to be called so that you can last minute save the day. It has 1,000 bullets to mow down enemies, and it has a ton of rockets that are very strong for killing chargers, tanks, and Bile Titans. Save the rockets for the big boys, use the gun for the small boys, and you will kill everything in sight. Yes, you can kill yourself pretty easily with it if you're stupid like me, because I'm pretty dumb. And I know when it runs out of ammo, I want to cry a little bit. But when you have it, it's a beautiful time. And finally, at the top of S tier, we have the Orbital Rail Cannon. This is the best orbital in the game. You call it in, it targets the strongest enemy in the area, which will most likely be a tank, a Bile Titan, or a charger, and then bada bing, bada boom, it's gone. Just like that. One of the main reasons why I put it on top though, is that unlike the orbital laser, you can use this unlimited amount of times. Yes, it takes a long time for it to come back, but when it does, boom. Everybody and their mother should be using this. It's pretty obvious why. It's the best thing for killing the biggest threats. And it's so satisfying when you call it out. Bada bing, bada boom. So there you have it. That is my Helldivers 2 stratagem tier list. Because the developers really care about this game, I know for a fact that this tier list will be obsolete in like a month because they're gonna buff some things and nerf other things. So if you're watching this way after it came out, understand this was in March, okay? But what do you think? Do you agree with my tier list? Do you disagree with it? If so, let me know in the comments down below what you think is the worst stratagem and what you think is the best stratagem. The beauty of Helldivers is that it's about expressing yourself through killing bugs and automatons. So I would love to hear what your favorite setup is in the comments down below. Okay guys, I'm pretty addicted to this game, so I'll catch you later.